Technology can reveal that going virtual is really not as simple as it seems. And in this case, no one ended the virtual stream of a funeral service.
Imagine being convicted of a crime you didn't commit. Now imagine spending decades behind bars while the real evidence sits buried in a dusty evidence locker, forgotten by the very system that promised justice. For some people, this nightmare became their reality. Today, we're diving into 3 chilling cases where the truth wasn't just hidden, it was deliberately buried. These are stories where justice took years, sometimes decades, to finally surface. And the most disturbing part, the people who could have stopped it knew the truth all along. Let's uncover what really happened when the system failed, and how the buried truth eventually came to light. Our first case takes us back to 1989 in Chicago, where a young man named Gary Dotson became one of the first people in America to be exonerated through DNA evidence. But his story begins much darker than that triumphant ending suggests. In 1977, 16-year-old Kathleen Crowell-Webb accused Dotson of kidnapping and assaulting her. Her testimony was convincing, detailed, and devastating. Dotson maintained his innocence, but the jury believed Webb. He was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison for a crime he insisted he never committed. For 6 years, Dotson sat in prison while the truth remained buried in Webb's conscience. Then in 1985, something extraordinary happened. Webb, now married and living a different life, came forward with a confession that would shake the criminal justice system. She admitted that she had fabricated the entire story. She explained that as a frightened teenager, she had invented the assault to hide a consensual relationship from her foster parents. Her lie had cost an innocent man 6 years of his life. But here's where the story takes an even more disturbing turn. Despite Webb's recantation, the courts initially refused to overturn Dotson's conviction. Prosecutors argued that her new testimony wasn't credible, creating a surreal situation where the accuser was saying the defendant was innocent, yet the system kept him imprisoned. It wasn't until 1989, when DNA testing became available, that the physical evidence finally proved what Dotson had been saying all along. The biological evidence from the original case didn't match his DNA. After spending nearly a decade fighting for his freedom, Gary Dotson walked out of prison, vindicated by science but robbed of years he could never get back. Now let's travel to North Carolina in 1983, where an even more devastating case of buried truth was unfolding. Darrell Hunt, a 19-year-old black man, was accused of the brutal murder of Deborah Sykes, a young newspaper editor. The case against Hunt was built almost entirely on eyewitness testimony that would later prove to be tragically unreliable. Despite having an alibi and no physical evidence linking him to the crime, Hunt was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. What makes Hunt's case particularly egregious is what investigators knew but chose to ignore. In 1994, DNA testing definitively excluded Hunt as the source of biological evidence from the crime scene. You would think this would lead to his immediate release, but you'd be wrong. Prosecutors argued that Hunt could have had an accomplice, a theory for which they had absolutely no evidence. Hunt remained in prison while the real perpetrator walked free. For 19 years, Darrell Hunt lived behind bars for a murder he didn't commit. The truth was literally buried in the evidence files, proven by science, yet ignored by a system more interested in maintaining a conviction than seeking justice. It wasn't until 2003 that advances in DNA technology finally identified the real killer, Willard Brown, a man who had committed another similar crime and who Hunt had never met. In 2004, Hunt was finally exonerated and released. He spent the rest of his life advocating for criminal justice reform, but the trauma of those stolen years never left him. Tragically, in 2016, Darrell Hunt took his own life, unable to fully escape the shadow of the injustice he had endured. Our final case brings us to Texas in 1986, where Anthony Graves was convicted of a horrific crime, the murder of 6 people, including 4 children. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on the testimony of Robert Carter, the actual murderer, who claimed Graves had helped him commit the killings. There was no physical evidence linking Graves to the crime scene. No witnesses placed him there. No motive was ever established. Yet, based solely on Carter's accusation, Graves was sentenced to death. Here's where the buried truth becomes even more disturbing. Robert Carter eventually recanted his testimony, admitting that he had lied, and that Graves had nothing to do with the murders. He made this confession multiple times, including on his deathbed before his execution in 2000. But even with the sole witness admitting he had lied, even with the actual killer saying Graves was innocent, the system kept Graves on death row. For 18 years, Anthony Graves lived in a 6 by 10-foot cell, knowing that the state of Texas was planning to execute him for a crime everyone involved knew he didn't commit. The prosecutor in the case, Charles Sebesta, had withheld exculpatory evidence from the defense, evidence that could have prevented Graves's conviction in the first place. This prosecutorial misconduct kept the truth buried for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't until 2010 that a special prosecutor reviewed the case and found no credible evidence against Graves whatsoever. He was released after spending 12 years on death row, becoming the 64th person in America to be exonerated from death row since 1973. What connects all 3 of these cases is more than just wrongful convictions. It's the deliberate burial of truth by the very people sworn to seek justice. In each case, evidence existed that could have freed these men: Webb's confession, Hunt's DNA exclusion, Carter's recantation. Yet prosecutors fought to keep that truth buried, prioritizing their conviction rates over human lives. These cases also reveal the devastating flaws in our criminal justice system. Eyewitness testimony, once considered the gold standard of evidence, has been proven to be shockingly unreliable. Studies have shown that witnesses can be influenced by suggestive questioning, unconscious bias, and the passage of time. Yet countless people remain in prison based primarily on such testimony. The introduction of DNA technology has been revolutionary in exposing these injustices. The Innocence Project, founded in 1992, has used DNA evidence to exonerate over 375 people in the United States, including 21 who served time on death row. The average time served by exonerees is 14 years. That's 14 years of stolen birthdays, missed milestones, and destroyed relationships. And DNA testing is only available in a fraction of cases. Experts estimate that thousands more innocent people remain imprisoned in cases where biological evidence doesn't exist or wasn't preserved. The stories of Gary Dotson, Darrell Hunt, and Anthony Graves aren't just historical footnotes. They're urgent reminders that our justice system is fallible and that the consequences of those failures are devastating. These men lost decades of their lives to buried truth, and countless others remain trapped in the same nightmare right now, waiting for someone to uncover the evidence that could set them free. If these stories moved you, if they made you think differently about justice and truth, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're going to keep digging into cases where the truth was buried, forgotten, or deliberately hidden. Every like, every share, every comment helps these stories reach more people, and awareness is the first step toward change. Join our community of truth seekers by subscribing today. Together, we'll keep uncovering the stories that demand to be told. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next investigation.